Hello, guys. My name is Marina. I used to believe that 30 was late for love. That belief wasn't born from logic, but from the quiet pressure that came from everywhere. Relatives asking when I'd settle down, friends posting wedding photos while I sat in cafes pretending not to care, and the empty hum of evenings that stretched too long. I was 30 when I married. Not too old, not too young, just at the age where the heart starts to crave peace more than excitement. When Daniel proposed, I didn't feel the butterflies I used to dream about as a girl. There was comfort, steadiness, and a calm kind of affection. I told myself that was enough. Maybe even better than passion. Passion fades, I thought, but companionship, that's what lasts. The night before our wedding, I sat by the window of my small apartment, staring at the streetlights glowing like distant stars. My white dress hung on the closet door. It looked perfect. Too perfect for someone who wasn't sure she still believed in forever. I told myself it was just nerves. Everyone gets cold feet. I'd waited too long to say yes to love. I couldn't ruin it now with doubts. The next morning I woke up early before the sun rose. My heart felt oddly heavy, not with dread but with something quieter. Something I didn't want to name. My mother came in, her face soft with pride and relief. "You're finally doing it," she said, smoothing my veil. I smiled, pretending her words didn't sting. Finally doing it. Like marriage was a box I needed to check before life ran out of pages. The ceremony was beautiful. Everyone said so. The flowers, the music, the way Daniel looked at me, all perfect. I tried to memorize every detail, but the day felt like it belonged to someone else. Even when he took my hand, when we said our vows, I felt like I was watching a movie about a woman named Marina getting married. Not living it myself. When the applause faded and we walked out into the afternoon light, I looked at Daniel and told myself I loved him. I really did, at least in the way I knew how to love then. He was kind, patient, the sort of man who never raised his voice. But love, real love, is not only kindness. It's fire, it's breath, it's knowing you can't walk away. I didn't have that. That night, as we checked into the small seaside hotel for our honeymoon, I stood on the balcony and watched the waves crash in the dark. Daniel was inside, unpacking, humming softly. I felt a sudden ache in my chest. Not for another man, but for another version of myself. The woman who once dreamed of wild love. The girl who wanted to feel chosen, not just ready. "Come inside, Marina," he said from the room. "It's cold out there," and I went, because that's what a good wife does. But as I lay beside him, listening to the ocean whisper outside, I felt something break quietly inside me. Not a sharp pain, but a slow, sinking emptiness. I couldn't explain it. Maybe it was grief for the girl I used to be. Maybe it was the beginning of the sadness I didn't yet understand. Everyone talks about how beautiful marriage is, how it completes you, But nobody tells you that sometimes it starts with a quiet goodbye to freedom, to dreams, to the person you thought you'd become. And so began my story. Not a fairy tale. Not a tragedy. Just the story of a woman who married at 30, believing peace was enough, until she learned that silence can also be lonely. The first year of marriage was gentle. Too gentle, maybe. Daniel and I slipped into a rhythm so ordinary that it felt rehearsed. We woke up, had breakfast, went to work, came home, watched TV, and went to bed. There were no arguments, no outbursts, no drama, just peace. But peace can be heavy when it's built on silence. At first, I told myself this was what mature love looked like. We didn't need passion or chaos. We had respect. We were building a life. But as the months passed, that life began to feel like a hallway with no doors. Endless, predictable, quiet. Daniel was kind, always kind. He'd ask how my day was, smile at my answers, and listen, but never deeply. He'd hold my hand when we walked down the street, yet his eyes always seemed somewhere else. Or maybe it was me who drifted. Sometimes, when he talked about work, his voice faded into background noise. I'd nod and smile while my mind wandered, to the sound of the sea on our honeymoon, to the feeling of wind in my hair before marriage, to moments when I felt alive. I didn't know how to tell him that comfort had begun to suffocate me. We had a small apartment, 2 rooms and a balcony that overlooked the city. On weekends, I'd stand there watching people below, couples laughing, children chasing pigeons, an old man feeding stray cats. I envied their small bursts of emotion. My own life had become too still, too tidy. One evening, I came home to find Daniel cooking dinner. The smell of garlic and butter filled the air. He looked up, smiling softly. "Long day?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Sit. It'll be ready soon." He served pasta, poured wine, and talked about a new project at work. I tried to listen. I really did. But the words blurred into a hum. All I could think was how his eyes never really met mine anymore, and how maybe mine didn't look for his either. After dinner, he kissed my forehead. I closed my eyes and waited for warmth to spread inside me. But nothing came. Just that same numbness. Polite, quiet, constant. That night, I lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling. I tried to remember the last time I'd laughed so hard my stomach hurt, or the last time my heart had raced for anything. I couldn't. Marriage, I realized, had become a performance, not a bad one, just one without a real script. The loneliness didn't show all at once. It crept in gently like fog rolling over water. It lived in the pauses of our conversations, in the way I scrolled through my phone when he spoke, in how we slept back to back without noticing. He was still good to me. He never shouted, never made me cry. But maybe that was the problem. He never made me feel anything anymore. One Sunday, I found my old journals in a box. They were filled with the words of a younger Marina. Fierce, passionate, foolish. She'd written about wanting to travel the world, to write stories, to fall in love so deeply that it scared her. I sat on the floor reading those pages, and for a moment, tears welled up. That girl felt like a ghost now. Somewhere along the way, I'd buried her under routines and quiet smiles. When Daniel came home, he found me still sitting there. "What's that?" he asked. "Just old memories." He smiled, kissed my hair, and went to shower. He didn't ask what kind of memories they were. He never did. One evening, rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder. I stood by the window watching the drops race down the glass. Daniel was asleep on the couch, his mouth slightly open, the TV light flickering on his face. I felt a sudden urge to wake him, to tell him I missed him, even though he was right there. But the words caught in my throat. Because how do you explain missing someone who hasn't gone anywhere? That night I walked out onto the balcony barefoot, the rain cold on my skin. The city lights shimmered through the downpour. For a few minutes, I just stood there, letting myself feel something real, even if it was sadness. Behind me, I heard the door slide open. "Marina, what are you doing?" Daniel's voice was soft, half asleep. "Nothing," I said. "Just watching the rain." He reached out and touched my arm. "You'll catch a cold," I smiled faintly. "Maybe." He led me back inside, wrapped me in a towel, kissed my forehead, and turned off the lights. I lay beside him again, the sound of rain fading in the distance, and thought about how love can feel both safe and unbearably lonely at the same time. In the darkness, I whispered a quiet truth only I could hear. "I love you, Daniel, but I'm disappearing." And I think that's when it really began. The slow unraveling of a marriage that looked perfect from the outside, but was quietly fading from within. The hardest part about feeling empty is pretending you're not. I became good at it. Smiling at dinner parties, laughing at work, holding Daniel's hand in public, all while a quiet hollowness pulsed inside me. Steady as a heartbeat. People said I was lucky. "You've got such a caring husband," my friends would say. "You two look perfect together." I nodded, grateful for their words, even though they felt like salt on a wound I couldn't show. At home, Daniel and I moved like two parallel lines, close, but never touching. He worked late more often now. When he came home, we'd eat dinner in near silence. Not cold silence, just polite. The kind that fills the air when there's nothing left to say. One evening, I asked if he was happy. He looked surprised. "Of course I am. Aren't you?" I smiled because I didn't know how to say no. How do you tell someone that you have everything you thought you wanted and still feel nothing? After that night, I stopped asking questions. It was easier to keep peace than to search for meaning. Days blurred into each other. Work, home, dinner, bed, repeat. I started walking after work, just to breathe. Sometimes I'd stop by a small cafe near the park, the kind of place where time seemed slower. The owner, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, learned my order. Black coffee, no sugar. She'd smile at me like she understood something I hadn't said. One rainy afternoon, I saw a familiar face there. Liam, an old friend from university. I almost didn't recognize him at first. 10 years had added lines to his face, but his eyes were the same, bright, alive, curious. "Marina?" he said, standing up. I laughed softly. "It's been ages." He smiled, that easy, open smile I remembered. "You look exactly the same." I didn't. I knew I didn't. But it felt nice to hear it. We talked for hours. About old days, the people we'd lost touch with, the silly things we'd done. I hadn't laughed like that in years. For a moment I forgot the quiet weight I carried. When I got home that evening, Daniel was watching TV. He looked up, smiled briefly, then turned back to the screen. "You're late," he said casually. "Yeah. Ran into an old friend. That's nice." And that was it. No curiosity, no warmth, just another piece of the silence that had become our language. I showered, changed into my robe, and sat by the window. The city lights blurred through the glass. I thought about Liam, the way he'd listened, really listened. It wasn't attraction, not yet. It was something gentler, recognition. Someone had looked at me and seen me. Over the next few weeks, I found excuses to stop by the cafe again. Sometimes Liam was there, sometimes not. When he was, we talked about books, travel, life, things Daniel and I never spoke about anymore. He told me he'd gone through a divorce 2 years earlier. "It's strange," he said, stirring his coffee. "You spend years building something, and one day you realize you don't belong inside it anymore." I looked at him and said quietly, "I think I understand." He smiled sadly. "Yeah, you always did." That night as I walked home, guilt tugged at me, not for seeing him, but for feeling alive again, for remembering that I was still someone outside of being a wife. When I reached home, Daniel was asleep. His breathing was steady, peaceful. I watched him for a while, wondering if he ever felt the same emptiness I did, or if he'd simply accepted our life as enough. Maybe that was the difference between us. He found comfort in stability. I was starting to feel trapped by it. A few days later, I tried to talk to him. "Daniel," I said one evening, "do you ever feel like we're drifting?" He frowned. "Drifting? What do you mean?" "I don't know. Like something's missing." He sighed softly. "Marina, every couple goes through quiet phases. We're fine. Don't overthink it." Fine. That word again. I hated it. How small it sounded. How final. He didn't notice the tears in my eyes when I turned away. That weekend I took a walk alone. The air was cold, the sky gray. I sat on a park bench and watched leaves fall. There was a strange kind of peace in watching things let go. I thought about my life, not the one I had, but the one I dreamed of. The woman who wanted to write, travel, and love without fear. Where had she gone? Maybe she'd been left behind on my wedding day, in that quiet moment before I said I do. I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, I just want to feel something again. And maybe, somewhere deep inside, a part of me answered, then stop pretending you're happy. The days that followed felt heavier, not in a dramatic way, but in the quiet, invisible way that seeps into the spaces between thoughts. I moved through routines like a ghost wearing my own skin. Daniel was the same, steady, kind, unchanged. It almost made me angry, how little he noticed me slipping away. How could someone share a bed with you and not feel that you'd already started to leave in your heart? Work became my escape. I stayed late, took on extra projects, just to fill the silence that waited for me at home. I told myself I was being productive, but really I was just avoiding the life I'd built. One afternoon, as I was packing up my desk, a message popped up on my phone. Liam. Coffee tomorrow? Same place? I hesitated for a long moment before typing back. Me. Sure. 5 p.m. I stared at the screen after sending it, my pulse quickening with something I hadn't felt in years. Anticipation. It wasn't love, not even attraction, really. It was aliveness, the kind that wakes you from a long gray sleep. When I saw Liam the next day, he smiled in that warm, unguarded way he always did. You look tired, he said gently. I laughed. I think I've been tired for a long time. We sat for hours again, talking, laughing, pausing between stories that didn't need endings. He asked about my writing, the passion I'd buried under years of responsibility. I shrugged, embarrassed. It's been forever, I said. So start again, he said simply, as if it were the easiest thing in the world. That night, I came home and opened my old laptop. The screen flickered to life, and for the first time in years I began to type. Words spilled out, uneven but alive. It wasn't much. Just a few pages about a woman who wakes up one day and doesn't recognize her own reflection. But it felt like breathing again. Daniel came into the room halfway through. What are you doing? Writing, I said. He smiled faintly. That's nice. He kissed my forehead and left. No questions, no curiosity, just politeness. And in that moment I knew I wasn't angry at him. Not really. I was angry at us, at what we'd allowed ourselves to become. A few weeks passed. I met Liam a handful of times, always at the same cafe, always for coffee. We never crossed any line. But the space between us was thick with things we didn't say. He asked about Daniel once. "He's a good man," I said. "I'm sure he is," he replied quietly. We didn't talk about it again. We didn't have to. Sometimes he'd tell me stories about his travels, places I'd only dreamed of visiting. I'd close my eyes and imagine it. Sunlight through train windows, rain in foreign cities, the feeling of motion and freedom. When I opened my eyes, I'd see Liam watching me, not with desire, but with a kind of gentle sadness, as if he knew exactly what I was longing for. One evening after dinner, Daniel suggested watching a movie. I agreed. Halfway through, he fell asleep on the couch, his hand still resting lightly on mine. I looked at him and felt a deep ache, not for another man, but for the life we might have had if we'd both known how to love each other differently. I whispered his name once. He didn't stir, and for the first time, I wondered if we'd ever really known each other at all. Later that night, I found myself walking to the cafe without thinking. The lights were off, the chairs stacked. Through the window, I could see the reflection of my own face, tired, unsure, older somehow. I realized I wasn't searching for Liam. I was searching for myself. Standing there, with the cool wind brushing my face, I whispered the words I'd been afraid to say out loud. I'm not happy. It was such a simple truth, and yet saying it felt like breaking a spell. When I got home, Daniel was still asleep. I watched him for a while, then went into the other room, opened my laptop, and began to write again. This time the story wasn't about someone else. It was about me. About a woman who thought love meant choosing peace, until she realized peace without passion was just silence wearing a smile. As dawn began to break, light spilling through the curtains, I closed the laptop and whispered to the empty room. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I can't keep pretending. And though nothing had changed yet, not my marriage, not my life, something inside me finally did. There's a strange kind of clarity that comes before everything falls apart. It's quiet, almost tender, like the moment before a storm, when the air feels heavy but still. You don't know what's coming, only that something is. For me, it started with a simple question from Daniel. We were having dinner, another ordinary Tuesday. The sound of rain outside, the clinking of silverware, the faint hum of the TV in the next room. Out of nowhere, he looked up and said, "Are you happy?" The question caught me off guard. My fork paused midair. "Why do you ask?" He shrugged, eyes still on his plate. "You've been distant lately." "I don't know. Different." For a second I thought about lying, saying, "Of course I am," pretending like always. But something inside me cracked. "I don't know," I whispered. Daniel looked up, his expression uncertain. "You don't know?" I shook my head. I don't feel like myself anymore." The silence that followed was thick, heavy. He looked at me for a long time, searching for something he couldn't name. Then he nodded slowly, as if trying to understand a language he'd never learned. "Is it something I did?" "No," I said quickly. "It's not you," he smiled sadly. "It's always me a little, though, isn't it?" And there it was. The kind of truth that doesn't explode, but sinks deep, like a stone dropped in still water. That night we barely spoke. He went to bed early. I stayed on the couch, staring at the rain streaking the windows. I thought about the years we'd shared, all the small, kind moments that built a life together. It wasn't a bad marriage. That was the problem. It was a quiet one. Too quiet, at some point. I started crying, not loud, desperate tears, but the slow kind that come when you realize something beautiful is ending, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. I wasn't crying because I didn't love Daniel. I was crying because I still did. But love, I realized, isn't always enough. The next morning, I met Liam again. He noticed the redness in my eyes right away. "Rough night?" I nodded. Daniel asked if I was happy. "What did you say?" "The truth," I said softly. He didn't speak for a moment. Then he reached across the table, not to touch me, just to be closer. That must have been hard. It was. I paused, but it felt honest. He looked at me with something that wasn't pity. It was understanding. The kind you only get from someone who's been there. "I used to think honesty would destroy everything," he said. "Thank you, guys.